We'll go to the next person. I'm going to really surprise you now. You're going to find out how old I really am. The next person that I'm going to bring to the stage, I'm proud to say that I've known him for half a century. That's right, 50 years. I first laid eyes on him in 1966 at City College of San Francisco. We subsequently started San Francisco State College together in 1967. We got arrested together, fighting racism at the campus. The following year, he led one of the longest student strike in American history at San Francisco State. He is a world-acclaimed actor, director, producer, but what I'm most proud of is that he is also an activist and a humanitarian. Whether or not it's struggling against the anti-apartheid struggle, fighting to free the Cuban Five, struggling for workers to have democracy at work, he's been standing there in the forefront. But let me just say one more thing before I introduce this brother. He is in the tradition of Paul Robeson, a man of great artistic talent who did not allow his celebrity to shackle him and remain quiet. He's courageous. He's in the tradition of Harry Belafonte, who took on the responsibility of organizing Hollywood and entertainers to support the civil rights movement. I now bring to you Brother Danny Glover, San Francisco's own. Let's give him a standing round of applause. Brother Danny Glover. Brother Danny Glover.
You know, when we were much younger, Buzz and I have to refer to him as Buzz to make a very clear delineation between the Clarence Thomas that we all know about in Washington, D.C., and the Clarence Buzz Thomas that we revere, and the person who has maintained his integrity and his will and his desire in the struggle, the fight, the struggle of justice. This is an extraordinary moment for us. Those of us who had found their way as we meander and struggle through life, whether we're supporting the struggles of farm workers, grape workers, as young students, we were supporting the struggle and the boycotts to bring justice to farm workers. Or whether it's the struggles we've been able to be a part of in our life, the struggles against the death penalty, the struggles that we now engage in for justice for Mario Woods, I was just in Baltimore a couple of weeks ago supporting Bernie Sanders and campaigning for Bernie Sanders, and there was an enormous response from the community for Freddie Gray, another victim of police brutality. How people came together, and it was a march that was led by members of the clergy. Must have been about 10 ministers there on a Sunday after church who brought their congregations and members of the community down to have a march and a rally because Freddie Gray hasn't got justice yet. There's no justice for Freddie Gray. Just there is no justice yet for Mario Woods. Those are the struggles that we have, as Buzz has said, the struggles that we need to embrace and to push forward here. While we can talk about human rights, but we can't talk about human rights unless we talk about economic rights as well. We cannot mention human rights without talking about economic rights. And that's what makes this moment most important. I've had the opportunity over the last 2.5 years to work with auto workers in Canton, Mississippi, which is near Jackson, Mississippi, the home of Freedom Summer in 1964. But very little has changed in Jackson, Mississippi, except that Jackson, Mississippi has more black elected officials than any state in the union, and yet very little has changed. So when we talk about these workers who are voting just to have a union, to vote to have a union, having to struggle over the last 3 years, as Nissan, who deals with unions all over the world, whether they're South Africa, whether they're Brazil, whether they're Germany, whether they're Japan, will not allow these workers to have the right to vote to have a union, to make a choice to have a union. And what we see is a divide there. It becomes an economic divide, a divide around racism, but becomes a class divide. Because some of those people, same people who supported, who denied support for these members and these workers, are people who had campaigned and worked in the civil rights movement. And some of them are basically anti-union. So we have people who had worked maybe a half a century ago in the civil rights movement, finding that they have different class interests at this time when it comes to supporting these workers. In Mississippi, the campaign for presidency, the campaign for building a new movement around justice has as much to do with race as it has to do with class as well. We have to recognize that. The old leadership, the leadership that at one point in time may have stood up in the face of violence, in the face of justice, that leadership has let us down. It has sold us often to the highest bidder. And that highest bidder, as Bernie Sanders has often said, has some connection with Wall Street, some connection with wealth, some connection with the 1%. So as we understand what we have to do, we have to be very clear about where we stand right now. And sometimes it looks complicated. We have to put at the forefront, certainly, the violence of young men of color. Absolutely, is at the forefront. We have to put at the forefront the violence of women, and particularly women of color. We have to put at the forefront not only justice, with respect to eat, to pay, and having a living wage. We have to put those at the forefront. And for those who believe that we have to continue living on the minimum wage of $7.50 an hour, we have to kick them to the curb. We have to fight them relentlessly. The ILWU Local 10 has a glorious history. If you're born and raised in San Francisco and have lived here your life, you know about that history. You know about the history of the 1934 strike, when Harry Bridges went around to all the black churches here in the Bay Area and said, if you don't cross the picket line, if you do not become scabs on this strike, I'll make sure, I promise you, there'll be black men on the docks when we win the strike. The operative word was when we win the strike, knowing that history was on their side and they were going to win the strike. He kept that promise. Friends of mine, all of here, men that I grew up with, men that I respected. I remember when I was out in Hunters Point as a student, young black men who were dock workers took the Bayview Hunters Point Opera House and turned it into a place to show movies, and turned it into a place into which to bring the community together. That kind of fire that resonates here today, that they were engaged in the community. When I worked in Bayview Hunters Point, in the Office of Community Development, the Model Cities Program, and the mission in the early 70s, there were men and women who were leaders, who could use their intelligence, use their organic intelligence to create grassroots democracy, to make choices about what they demand and what were important for their community in terms of programs. That Bayview Hunters Point is not the same Bayview Hunters Point that I worked in over 40 years ago. It's not the same Bayview Hunters Point that Mario Woods lost his life in. That Bayview Hunters Point is something where we have to reclaim. We have to reclaim its citizenship. As citizens, we have to reclaim that Bayview Hunters Point. We have to reclaim the mission as citizens and say that the mission cannot be gentrified on our watch. We have to reclaim this city. Our campaign, this movement, and I say campaign because the presidential campaign is not a movement, really. It may provide us with the elements and the platform to build a movement, but that movement has to be sustained day in, day out, 24/7. That movement has to grow, it has to build. It has to understand that the dynamics and the dialectics which we live within are changing, are always changing. And it has to meet the call and meet the changes that occur. So that we here celebrating this May Day, celebrating this long, extraordinary will of working people, of women in the 1820s who worked in the hills in places like Massachusetts, who worked long hours in the textile mills when they were established there, producing the cloth and clothing made by the cotton that slaves picked in this country. Not knowing, and perhaps, hopefully, historically, finding the connection between them and those slaves. Those slaves were the first capital. Those slaves and slavery and cotton was the first engine that drove the Industrial Revolution. They find their connection today in us, with us. We become the transcending moment for those two to come together, to understand that that fight then, as that fight as is today, belongs to all of us, their descendants and our descendants as well. We need that. We need to find it. That's what May Day has to represent. To find that connection between us. To find the connections that we tried to build during the populist movement at the turn of the 20th century, where poor white people and poor black people, oppressed white people and oppressed black people, tried to find a common place. To find that place during the great moments, as I expressed, that represent the history of ILWU Local 10. To find that other moments when we come together, even in the 20th century, and it was around a radical precept around justice, that it has to be a radical trend. It can't be business as usual. It can't be just waiting around for the crumbs to come off the table. This is not what this fight about. We have to continue to build that fight. We have to continue to build that fight. As we look at even San Francisco State now. When we came together in 1968, and I'll tell you, the Black Student Union, we were narrow initially. We thought it was ours time. We thought it was ours. I'm not giving you no revisionist history around. We came fighting and screaming to that third world scrap, but realized that history was on our side, that we were doing the right thing at the right moment in creating the alliance of African Americans, Asian Americans, progressive whites. I see Steve up here, they're up there, right up at the top. Progressive whites, Latino Americans out there to build something else. It's in jeopardy now. But part of the reason why it's in jeopardy because it's lost part of the community contact, the community underlaying and foundation that gave it the strength to be victorious in that strife. All these things, these lessons that we learn, these moments that we learn that are transcending moments, transformative moments, we got to use this as we continue to build. And even though Buzz says we've been knowing each other 50 years, in a wonderful 50 years, and been friends all of that 50 years around struggle. We weren't friends because we were partying together. We are friends around the issues and continue to be issues. And as long as we breathe, we continue to be issues around there. Right here, sitting in this Union Hall, we're here to save humanity. That's our task. However we raise it, we're here to transform humanity and transform the relationships that we have between each other. We're also here to transform our relationship with this fragile planet, Mother Earth. We got to take that back. We got to take it back. We got to take back, as Langston said, the hills and the mines. We got to take it back for we the people. So we got a lot of work to do. You know, we got a lot of work to do. The plate is full. And the plate is full with possibilities. The plate is full with the possibilities of us reimagining ourselves and reimagining what we have and what we can do. Campaign, this presidential campaign, has brought out a lot of people. I was down in LA doing a small project for an evening, a night, a few hours. Down there, the makeup artist comes to me and says, Danny Glover, I'm so happy, I'm so proud to be doing your makeup. Not because of your work so much, which I appreciate, but you out there, like we are, working people, sort of supporting Bernie Sanders. You out there, like we are, supporting change. And then she began to talk about all the things she had been doing around voter registration here in California. We can do California. We can get California. All the things she was doing. The first AD, first assistant director, comes up and tells me all the things she's been doing around Bernie Sanders. So those are the things. This is how we begin to build our world. Our world. This is how we begin to transform our world. And right here, the old, the young, the new. We begin right here. As Langston said, let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the place where every man is free. Thank you.